Well, just as Abram and Sarai, or Abraham and Sarah, went on a faith journey, and they took a step of faith, and they didn't know where they were going or what God had in store for them. They took that faith journey, and it took them out of their comfort zone. And I'm going to propose we're going to go on a faith journey for the next couple of weeks, and that faith journey is going to take us out of our comfort zone as a church, as individuals. But anytime we go out of our comfort zone, when we do that, when we take those steps of faith, that's when we grow. That's when we stretch. When we do those things, God works in our lives. And so we're going to go on this faith journey, and we're going to talk about the E word. Anybody want to take a guess at what the E word is? Evangelism. Yeah, and everybody wanted to stay home today. I know. It's like, I heard they're talking about evangelism in church. Maybe I'll skip today. But you guys are not the ones who skip, so that's good. What I want to suggest, so I'm going to ask this is audience participation, part of our service. So when I say the word evangelism, what are the negative thoughts that come to your mind? What's that? I heard something. TV ministers, right? Street preachers. Knocking on doors. What else? I know you got some more. Come on. How about over here? What's that? Trespassers. Yeah, coming on my lawn, getting up on my door, getting up my face. What's going on? What else? What? Snake oil? What else? Asking for money. Right. What else? Anything else? That's all you got? Jehovah's Witnesses in the back. Annoying. Any more? I can take one or two more. I'm sure somebody's got one. What's that? Prayer rugs. Okay. Anything else? In the back, Melissa. Pressuring. So those are a lot of feelings that we get from that word, there's negative sense of that. And so we don't want to be that. How many people want to be that? Nobody wants to be any of those things, right? And so, but that's the idea we have behind evangelism. But I think we need to talk about evangelism and what evangelism is and about sharing our faith, because this is what's going on. And we're going to talk over the next few weeks about how to do the E word without any of those things going on. But it's interesting because those are small groups that are doing the book, there's a statistic. It's based on the mainline church study on evangelism they did with mainline churches. Now, a mainline church is United Methodist, Lutheran, Episcopal, Presbyterian. Those are the mainliners. Those were the big churches of the day. Interestingly enough, though, the mainline church has shrunk in half over the past several decades. And in fact, the United Methodist Church has shrunk in half over those past few decades. And if we continue to shrink at the same rate as we have in the past decade, in future decades, the United Methodist Church will no longer exist in the year 2052. So that's actually within sight for some of us, myself maybe not included, but I may not see that day. But if we continue on this trend, then the church will be extinct, the United Methodist Church. I don't think the church, Big C Church, general around the world will be extinct, but I think the United Methodist Church, the mainline church, will either look very different or be extinct. The study found this. This is interesting. The study that they did found this. We found that only 0.5% of 30,000 mainline churches studied were doing a significant job reaching unchurched people. 0.5% of 30,000 churches. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that the church has been in decline during the same period that the church has been avoiding evangelism. I think they go together. I think when we cease to do that, when we lock up the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, when we lock it up and bind it up and keep it to ourselves, we have really nowhere else to blame or point fingers for the decline of our church and of the decline of what's going on except ourselves. So we've got to unbind it. We've got to unchain it. We've got to feel good about it again because there's so much negativity around it. I've been in part of the mainline United Methodist Church for 21 years now, and every time I approach the issue of evangelism, I get a quote back. And it's a quote from a famous saint. And thank Eric Doolittle for making me this guy this morning. Does anybody know who this saint is? St. Francis of Assisi. He was a monk, and he had an order, and that's a little bird because he's associated with nature and animals, and so he's a beloved saint. And one of the things I started, as I talk about evangelism in the mainline church, I hear this quote from St. Francis, and the quote goes like this: "Preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words." What people interpret as, this is the interpretation, I don't have to say anything. I just have to be a good person. I just have to let my life and how I live my life be my witness. And I never have to mention God or mention my faith in Christ. I don't have to say anything. I'm just going to let my life speak and be a witness. But notice that St. Francis said, when necessary. And what I want to suggest that there are times when it is necessary for us to use our words. Because our actions bring credibility to our words. But it's not an either-or scenario. We actually have to match our words with our actions. That's important. And I'll give an example of that. Here's an interesting tidbit on St. Francis. Do you know that there is no recorded evidence that St. Francis ever said this? In fact, this quote doesn't show up in the literature before 1990. But he was an evangelist, and he was during the Crusades. And St. Francis, not only, he actually gave some rules to his monks about loving each other, and there's a rule that is very similar to that saying, but what he said to his monks was, you guys are living together 24/7, you need to love each other in action, not just say you love each other. Has anybody ever said that to your spouse before? Someone you live with 24/7, that's important for that community life. But he also was one who went to the Sultan and shared his faith with the Sultan. And it's, according to the story and the legend, is that the Sultan would have converted to Christianity had it not been the fact that he would have been executed had he did. But he was so impressed with the message that St. Francis brought to him and shared with him during the Crusades. Get this, during the Crusades, they're enemies fighting. But he goes to the Sultan, the enemy, and shares the love of God with them. And it says that he would have converted if it not had been for his life being important. So that's interesting. So we have to decide something today, and I'll illustrate this a little bit further. I was out, some of us, here's one of my cyclist stories again. And I ride, I'm out riding one day, and I'm going down this road, and this Pepsi truck pulls out of a convenience store and goes around a curve just out of an intersection, but the driver had left 2 of the bay doors open on the side of the truck. So all these 2-liter, 1-liter, whatever bottles of Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Diet Mountain Dew are going out of the truck onto the road, blocking 3 lanes of traffic. People are honking their horns, yelling at the guy, one finger saluting the guy, running over bottles, going around, getting all upset. He pulls his truck over, and I watch this whole thing as I'm riding, and I keep riding, and I see him pull over. I'm thinking, wow, that's terrible. And I keep riding, and a little voice inside of me says, Matt, you ought to stop and help him. Really? Really? You want me to stop? And I'm in the middle of exercise right here. And then I thought, yeah, you should stop. And so I turn around, my bike around, I ride back, and I put my bike on the side of the road, and I start picking up bottles, and I'm helping stack. I mean, neither one of us is saying anything. He's like frantic, he's sweating, people are still honking and getting all upset with him. We're cleaning up bottles out of the middle of the road as fast as we can. We're stacking them in the truck, and we get everything loaded back in, the trash, broken bottles back in, and finally everything's back in, the doors are down, and he just stops because he's in a hurry, and he says, thank you for helping me. And I said, no problem. He says, you want a 2-liter bottle of soda? You want some soda? I said, it's not going to fit in my bottle holder on my bike. But he said, thank you. And I just said to him, you're welcome. I just felt like God wanted me to stop and help you today. And he looked at me like, what? What did he say? He said, well, thanks. And he got in his truck and he drove away. So I don't know about you, but here's the question. If I don't introduce God into the situation, if I say nothing of God, who gets credit for the good deed? I do, right? See, it's the action that brings credibility to the words. But the words and the actions need to go together. Does that make sense? Because if I don't speak God into the situation, because really, maybe it was the parable of the Good Samaritan that I learned in the church that impressed upon me, Matt, you ought to stop and help this guy, right? So God was at work in my life, and I wanted him to know that God cared about his situation. Even his dumb mistake that he made in the middle of his day was God was still there with him. I wanted him to know that. And that's why I shared that. Now, I can only imagine he got home that evening, sat down to dinner with his family, and I bet you he told that story. I bet you he said, you'll never believe what happened to me today. And it probably been mostly about all the Pepsi going everywhere. But he said, you know, this guy helped me. And he said something to me about God. Can you believe that? But see, that's the thing. Is that all I did was just plant a seed of faith. And all I did was share good news with him. And that's what it is. That's what evangelism is. Evangelism is sharing good news. That's what it means, simply to share good news, to tell somebody some good news. And that was good news to him on a very hard day when nobody else liked him. He knew that God liked him, right? That's good news. And so that's why it's important that we share this good news among us and to people so that we don't get just the credit ourselves. So we've got to decide, are we going to hide behind St. Francis or are we going to follow Jesus Christ? Who are we following? He followed Jesus Christ, and he shared his faith with others. Now, remember, that's what Paul was saying to us this morning in Romans chapter 10. He says, but how can they call on the one in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in one in whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone to proclaim him? People can't believe, can't know of God's good news unless someone tells them it is God's good news. Not just shows them. We have to show and tell. Remember that? Fourth preschool? Show and tell? Remember that? So here's some other reasons I picked up from the book, and I know you are obsessive compulsive about this paper being on the ground, so you're going to say, why isn't he picking up the paper? So here's one of the reasons, and I'm going to share some of these things. I took them directly out of the book that we're studying, but I picked the ones that I've actually heard people say here at Glenmar. So they're not only in the book, but it's very similar because we're all pretty similar. Here's one that said, I know we're supposed to talk with people about faith and invite them to church, but I don't want to lose friends. I feel guilty. And when we think of evangelism, all the negative things that we just said earlier, yeah, we're going to lose friends, right? You know, if we're pushy and arrogant and annoying, and if we're being salespeople about Jesus, that's gonna turn people off, and we will lose friends. But that's not what evangelism is. Evangelism is sharing good news. Now, Paul said in the verse in Romans at the very end, he said how beautiful, he was quoting Isaiah, he said, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Now, back in the day, Paul's day, they didn't have Facebook, they didn't have Twitter, they didn't have all this social media. In fact, they didn't have books. They had messengers. And those messengers traveled between towns and brought messages to people. And if you saw a messenger coming towards your home, you were standing out in your front yard, and a messenger off in the distance, you would start coming your way, and you go, well, are they bringing good news or are they bringing bad news? You ever heard that phrase, don't kill the messenger, right? Because that messenger might come and be bringing you bad news. And that bad news might be your sister just passed away. And that would be terrible news. But it also could be good news coming. It could be good news that your sister just had a baby and you're an uncle or you're an aunt. And that would have been good news, and you would have rejoiced, and you would have welcomed them into your home, and you would have wanted them to stay there and tell you more about it, right? See, the good news is attractive. The good news is what we want to hear. And so that good news is what we're looking for. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. And that's what evangelism is. That's bringing good news, not bad news. Now, we do have to understand some of the bad news to understand the good news, but overall, it's about the good news. You know, when the shepherds left the manger and went and told their friends, what were they sharing? Good news or bad news? Good news. When the women left the tomb after the resurrection and went back to the disciples and they said, hey, we met Jesus, he's alive. Was that good news or was that bad news? It was such good news that those guys went running back to the tomb to check it out for themselves. They wanted to know more. And that's what evangelism does. It plants seeds that help people want to know more about God. You know, when the disciples went and shared about who Jesus was, they asked people, they said, come and see, you got to check this guy out. You got to hear what he's teaching. They were excited. They were sharing good news. They weren't selling Jesus. They were just saying, come and see what I've experienced. Come and see what I know. You got to check this out. That's what they were doing. They weren't selling Jesus as much as introducing people to Jesus. And people then had to decide whether they wanted to follow too or not. That was the whole thing that was going on. It was good news. It was all about good news. Now, the other thing we often hear people say is this other one. It says, no, I don't want to knock on a stranger's door and give them some pamphlets. And we heard that this morning. Every group has got that one. And I've actually heard, what do you mean you're going to talk about evangelism, Pastor? Does that mean you're going to have us knocking on doors? That's not what evangelism, it might be. It is one method of evangelism, but it's not the only method of evangelism. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the method. Maybe not the best method because it tends to turn people off. But that's not what we're doing. We're not selling Jesus. We're not selling Jesus. We're introducing people to Jesus, just like if I had a friend and I wanted to introduce my friend to another friend, what would I do? Am I selling anything? No, I'm like, you got to meet this guy, or you got to meet this person. You guys would get along great. You might like this person. And so we introduce them to that person. We're not selling that person. And people who share their faith typically have a love for God that just kind of flows out of them. That they've experienced God's grace to such a degree and love of God to such a degree that they're wanting to share that love with other people. And so that's part of it. It comes naturally. It comes authentically. In fact, I saw this from one of our members not too long ago. We were out on a work project, helping work on a home, and I overheard, because I'm passing through the hallway carrying drywall, and as I'm carrying stuff to another room to work on another room, I'm passing through where they're working, and I hear one of our adult members saying to one of our younger members, hey, what's your favorite Bible verse? And then they talked a little bit, and then I heard him say, well, my Bible verses, and he shared his favorite Bible verse with this young person. And it was just so natural part of the conversation. It wasn't like he was trying to convert. It was just he was sharing his faith with this other young person, and they were in a good conversation. It was just natural. It was authentic. It just kind of flowed out of who he was. Does that make sense? He wasn't trying to sell Jesus. He was just saying, here's what's good about God in my life. And I want you to know what's good about God in my life. And then the last one is, I don't think we should do evangelism. It implies other religions are wrong. And that is an assumption and a misconception, not a truth. But that's something that we kind of hide behind as well. We say, well, I don't want to offend anybody. How many people here watch Dr. Oz? Anybody know Dr. Oz, the show, right? It's part of the Oprah effect. And what's interesting to me, on my day off, I'll occasionally get to check in with Dr. Oz because it's about health and well-being. And I'm amazed that Dr. Oz has no problem whatsoever talking about faith issues on his show, on public television, on cable television. He's brought in Joel Osteen. He's brought in Deepak Chopra. Did I get that right? He's brought in a Sikh spiritual person. And so he brings these people onto his show, and guess what they do? They share their faith on the show. And I'm thinking, I don't know where Dr. Oz is in terms of his relationship to God, but he certainly has no problem sharing faith through his TV show. And yet here we are in the church hiding our faith, binding it up, locking it up, keeping it to ourselves. When a person who may or may not be of faith, I don't know, it's not my job to know, that's not what it's about, but is able to share faith openly when we're trying to hide it. He's not worried about offending anybody. He's worried about sharing good news with people. and he's wanting to bless people, and he wants people to be better. So to kind of summarize this and to kind of give you an illustration of what I'm talking about, I'm going to share an example out of my own life that you will probably never have to do. And so the point is if I can do this, you can do this, right? Even though you'll never have to. So I was doing some street evangelism, the cold stuff, the stuff that we think is pushy. And I was out on the street evangelism, but my street evangelism was occurring during a neo-pagan satanic witchcraft conference. So they were going from building to building. I've used this illustration before, but I think it's a good illustration to bring us again to talk about this topic. So I'm out on the streets with a friend, a couple friends. We just thought we'd go out and talk, because it just was so curious. It was like, we were just like, they're like going to seminars about how to cast spells and doing all this stuff. So we're curious. So we're going out. We're going to talk to them and just talk to people and see what's going on. And they're all out in the streets. So we got witches, warlocks, Satanists, neo-pagans, New Agers. They're all out on the streets. I'm talking hundreds of them. And so we go out and we're talking to them. And I'm talking to this one young lady, and she is a Wiccan witch. And we're having this conversation. But as we're having this conversation, there's this other guy standing right beside her, and he's looking at me. He's giving me the eye daggers. You know the eye daggers? I know some of you know it better than others. We give people the eye daggers, like, I'm going to try and communicate how much I am upset with you right now just with my eyes. And so he keeps giving me the eye daggers, and he's not breaking eye contact. It's like stare down with Pastor Matt, And so I finally go, and I can tell he's like tense, jaw tense, eye daggers going. He's angry about something. And so I look over at him. I said, "So how you doing?" And he lets me know. What he reveals to me is that he's a Satanist. He worships Satan, and he starts to threaten me with demons. He says, "I could call down demons on you right now. I've got so much power that I could call these demons against you," and blah 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 blah. And he's talking about all this power that he has. And you know what Pastor Matt said? No, here's what I didn't say. I didn't say you're going to hell. Because he wanted to go there, right? I mean, that's where he would have no problem with that. But notice, that's the bad news. I didn't share bad news with him. He didn't need to hear that. But you know what I did? I just said, "Well, tell me more about that. How did you get to that point? What made you become a worshiper of Satan?" And he started to unpack all this stuff. And for about 20 or 30 minutes, you know what I did? I just listened. I just gave him my time. I gave him my attention. And I listened to all this very abusive stuff come out of his mouth. And then a friend came over to me and was, I think maybe even out of a little concern, said, "Matt, it's time to go." I said, "Okay, we'll go." And I said, I looked at him because I'd been listening to him the whole time. I hadn't said anything. I just asked questions. And then I said to him this before I left. I said, "I just want you to know that no matter what you've done or what your past has been about, that God still cares about you and wants to be a part of your life." And I saw a change in his heart instantly. He went from being mad and angry to total 180 in his spirit. And I began to see the tears well up in his eyes, and he was like, "Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh." And I could see just the total body language. I could see everything change in him in that instant. And I walked away. We went, gathered some of our friends back together. Then we decided we were going to go to Steak and Shake and get a milkshake and something to eat. It's like 11 o'clock at night. And as I'm walking in my car with my friends, he's walking to his car with his friends. We parked in the same area. And I look over and we make eye contact, but this time he waves and smiles. So I wave back and I smile. And my friend goes, "Who's that?" And I said, "That's my friend, the Satanist." But here's the thing. What did I share with him? I shared with him good news. He had heard enough bad news. And it was the bad news that led him to worship Satan. I simply just planted a seed of good news in his life. Now, how many people here could say to somebody else, I believe God cares about you and wants to be a part of your life. How many people here could say that, honestly say that to somebody? You're all evangelists. You are. You all have the ability to share your faith. It's not all about the bad news. It's about good news. How beautiful are the feet who bring good news. Amen.